with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Phronesis podcast. Thank you so much for checking in wherever you are in the world. Fun conversation today, interesting conversation today, big conversation today. I have Michael Mascolo, and he is a professor of psychology at Merrimack College and academic director of the Compass program, a transformational higher education experience based on principles of self-cultivation and mastery. He's also the director of Creating Common Ground, a nonprofit devoted to helping people bridge divides on contentious interpersonal, social, and political issues. Beyond that, who cares? I have to say, sir, that's probably one of my favorite bios ever. That's the best one so far.
Does anybody really listen to these things? The bio parts, we want to get right into the talking and the interesting stuff. Right?
Well, I am so appreciative of your time today. What do listeners need to know about you? What can they only learn here at Phronesis about Mike? What do you think?
Oh, gracious me. Well, you just said it. It was the who cares part, and it's about whatever we want to talk about here. What can we learn about me? I'm interested in development. I'm a developmental psychologist, and I think that the best way to think about the world is to ask, how can we promote development? How can we promote development in people? How can we promote development in nations? How can we promote development in learning? Whatever it is, everything develops, and how do we promote that? That's what I'm about.
I love it. And something that really stood out for me, and this is going to prop up our conversation today, but something that was on your website in your bio at Merrimack was this really, really interesting phrase. And the phrase went kind of like this: you have this interest, like you just said it, in development, but how people function as whole persons. Wow. I mean, talk about going straight to some of the big questions here.
Okay. Whole persons, kind of a mundane issue, even though it's profound, I think. People take psychology courses, and students, they want to major in psychology, and they get this course, Introduction to Psychology, and they open this big book. And this big book is divided up into chapters on sensation and perception and motivation and emotion. And you take the person and you break it down to all these little tiny, tiny parts. And in Humpty Dumpty gets broken down, and nobody ever puts Humpty Dumpty together again, in at least psychology. We're very, very good at studying the left nostril for 10 years, and then we move to the right nostril, and we're surprised by it. So many people don't recognize themselves in psychological theories because they're so tiny and isolated. And but we act and function as whole beings. We are whole beings. We are whole thinking, feeling, experiencing, relational beings. And perhaps the most important part of what it means, at least to me, to be a human being, is that, we are in part who we think we are. We are in part how we represent ourselves to be. We are our value judgments. We are our identification with moral systems, with systems of value. And a person comes into being, it seems to me, when a person identifies with some system of values and then seeks to live that system of values. And this goes back to Aristotle, the virtues and how it is that people come into being and become happy, not by pursuing pleasure or status or power, but instead by pursuing virtue, pursuing the good. What makes people happy is not the Snickers bar or getting the job or any of those things. Those things are short-lived. What makes people happy is virtue, doing good, contributing to the world, being able to end the day and look at it and say, that was good. I have done good. The world is a better place, hopefully.
So what I heard you say is, in part, becoming a whole person is once we've identified our values and started living them, started living into those and starting being whole with those values, right?
Absolutely. I think that where we are right now in this technological, scientific, secular age, and I say this too as an atheist, incidentally, is that we're a people who I think are searching for meaning, searching for purpose, searching for connection. We've dismantled so many social institutions. We've dismantled religion. We've dismantled value systems, and people feel lost. And I think they feel lost because there aren't communities of shared values. This is where our polarization comes from, in part, our political polarization, our social polarization. We seem not to have things to believe in to guide our lives. And all we're left with is this kind of retreat into the self, retreat into me, this kind of radical meism. I have to come up with my own values, my own morality, and I look inside of myself, but there's nothing there to find. The values are to be found between you and me. They're not me, but they're relational. That's where we find our values, to connect to some larger whole. And that's what makes us humans, I believe.
Well, I was having a conversation with a guest a few months back, and we were talking about faith. And it's an interesting conversation, because as you watch a lot of these, I had this conversation yesterday with a friend at lunch who was talking about how his place of worship, the numbers have just decreased. And there's probably in this 350 person sanctuary, 50 people over 2 services, right? I mean, it's just no one's there. And it's fascinating because if you think about it, to your point, it used to be, regardless of your belief set, Sunday mornings, large factions of our country went to a place, had some fellowship, hopefully heard a good positive message, had an opportunity to reflect. And in many places that has decreased. So even if you think about the activity of going somewhere, being with others, connecting, having a good message, reflecting, it's interesting because, to your point, that seems to have, well, if you look at the statistics and the data, that's decreased dramatically. So what fills that void? It's a fascinating question.
That is the question. What fills that void? And for me, and perhaps I'm being cynical, I don't see much that fills the void. What fills the void is stuff, buying things, status. Politically, what fills the void is being better than you, being more moral than you, being right, but nothing that's really, really sustaining. And as you talk about churches and the like, but why should people go to churches when churches are very doctrinaire so often? There's only one way of being, and this is the way in which you're supposed to be. It seems to me that we need ways of talking and communicating and dialoguing that we're listening closely to each other. We're open to what the other person has to say, and we're open to the possibility of transformation through other people, and they are to us as well. There's a way in which we can bring people together in that way. We'll have a chance to resurrect or bring back some sort of shared value system. Without it, we're empty.
There's a really interesting blogger. His name is Tim Urban, and he talks about the need. He frames it as there's a need for what's called an idea lab, and this is, I believe, in many ways, your passion right now, where people can gather, people can bring their different perspectives and create a space where they can dialogue, where they can have conversation, where they can seek to understand and at least better understand someone's lived experience and engage in that conversation where ideas can be bantered around. And he calls it the idea lab. He calls it like that. He feels that we're missing that space where we can freely dialogue and learn from one another. And that seems to be similar to kind of what you're suggesting here.
Yes, I think it is. Let me back up a second, though. Ideas are my life. I'm an academic. But in recent years, I've come to see the kind of the failure of logic and of rationality and of being just trying to solve problems through ideas. Don't get me wrong. Ideas are absolutely central. But what's prior to them is emotion, it seems to me. It's relating. In other words, if you and I want to come up with ideas together, the first thing we've got to do, it seems to me, is to see each other's humanity.
Mm.
We have to start with empathy. We have to start with compassion. We have to start with understanding. So often we speak just long enough we listen, just long enough so that we plan what it is that we want to say next. We don't listen to what the person is saying. So if I listen carefully to you and I hear the things that you're saying and I hear your plight, I could now begin to understand why you think the way you think. And I have compassion for you. Now we're connected. Now we can begin to work together because I care about what you think.
Yes.
It's not a matter of simply debating ideas in some abstract land. We can actually come up with, because we respect and care about each other, we can come up with ideas that neither one of us could have come up with on our own.
Thing that he talks about is just some of the demographic shifts in the United States where there's so many fewer kind of purple communities, so to speak. The communities demographics wise are becoming more blue and more red, which then leaves a little bit of a void for people to be around others with different perspectives, to engage with others with different perspectives. And so we then, not only do we have these online digital echo chambers, but we can have echo chambers in our communities where we simply just choose to be around people of like minds.
And then we get work at home. I'm just my own echo chamber now.
Yes.
There's a philosopher, a wonderful philosopher named Levinas, Emmanuel Levinas. He was a Holocaust survivor. And people say, wouldn't we all get along better if we just realized that we are all humans? We are all of the same species. If we all agreed that we were humans, we could get together and we treat each other well. Levinas says, no. He takes the thing and he flips it on its 180-degree angle. He says, every time you come up with a definition of what a human is, and you say, this is what all humans are, somebody's not gonna fit that definition. Somebody's gonna fall off the bandwagon there, and they're gonna become other. What we need instead is we need to see that each person is an infinity. Each person, when I talk to this person, when I talk to you, Scott, you're an infinity. And you have something that's going to say to me that I've never thought of or never. And I need you. I need your humanity, which is different than mine, to augment me. I can't do it myself. And so, go to your point, when we're geographically isolated, when we are isolated on Facebook, when we are isolated in our homes, we don't have the benefit of the other to check us. We don't have the benefit of the other to insert ideas inside of us that are going to challenge us and move us beyond who we are right now. Isolation is killing us. This polarization is killing us. We need community. How do you get it? That's a hard question, especially in modern day capitalism with all of our isolation.
Talk a little bit about some of your efforts. What have you been experimenting with? How do we promote that dialogue where people can get out of their homes, get into their communities, and get into spaces where we can set a baseline of our humanity, build a relationship, and then dialogue?
Yes. The most recent work I'm doing is the nonprofit Creating Common Ground. And that has a whole bunch of prongs to it that's related to what you just said. Amongst the things that we're doing there's three basic categories of things that we do with people. And the first is we try to teach people conflict management skills to improve their relationships. We are told that communication is the most important part of a relationship, but nobody ever tells us how to communicate. And so we have workshops, et cetera, that we teach people how to do that. And then we do the same thing in a political context. How do you get people of diverse political orientations to listen to each other and actually solve problems rather than beat each other up and try to be morally superior to each other, which is what we've got right now? That takes a good deal of moral and intellectual humility. That's the second thing we do. And the third thing is, what might be called self-cultivation seminars. What is important in your life? Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. I would prefer to soften it and say the unexamined life is not fully lived. We got to examine our lives. What are your values? How is it that people can become better versions of themselves by identifying their values, going out into the world, becoming better slowly over time, and particularly through connection? And then how do you connect? I'm going to say something that I don't like, and that is that the technology that we have these days is destroying us. The technology that we have today is wonderful. It's both wonderful and horrible. We are doing it right now as I look at you smiling.
Yeah.
We're connecting, and
Yeah.
this is good. We can connect over technology. It is possible. We have to do it right. We can create communities. There's a wonderful project in California called the Circling Institute. They do, in my opinion, really wonderful things where they help people to learn how to listen and be present for each other. There are perfect strangers who get together in these circles that they have, and they leave feeling transformed.
Mm.
It's possible. We can do it.
Talk a little bit about number two there. What have you seen? Can you tell me a story?
A year and a half, every Sunday night for 2 hours every week. And I got there's a small group of people, six people of different political persuasions. We got together. I taught them the methods of conflict management that we use. One is called collaborative problem solving, and the other one is a highfalutin term called dialectical problem solving. First one, you try to solve problems together. The second one, you confront your ideologies directly head on. So I taught them these approaches, and then I mediated a series of conversations in which this group of six were asked to essentially propose ways to solve three basic problems. One was, we started easy, school uniforms and capital punishment, and then race relations with police.
Mm.
Over the course of this year and a half, we had these discussions, all filmed and videotaped and all the rest of it. And the level of consensus, the level of shared understanding, on each of these problems, this group of diverse people was able to come up with massive agreement, massive common ground, how to solve these problems.
Mm.
At the end of this mass agreement, there was always some lingering ideological clashes. And then when we addressed them, we got partial, reasonable, moderate progress there too, where one would expect to get none. To get people together, and the second you begin to separate political ideology from human need, people begin to understand it. They begin to work together. Let's take, for example, race relations with the police. Enormously difficult topic. Once you begin to get rid of the rhetoric of whether or not police are all bad, or somehow if the city is bankrupt or whatever it is, and you begin to ask questions about what is it that people of color need from police, what is it that police need from their citizens, you immediately get to respect, you immediately get to understanding, and then people begin to propose solutions about how it is that you can get people from the constituent community together with police in partnerships to learn from each other. They're getting to know each other. These are the proposals that people came up with. They can be solved, but not if we see each other as stupid. My nemesis, my opponent is stupid, crazy, out of touch, or evil. The second you do that, it's over.
Yeah.
Got to see beneath the ideology to the human beneath it.
Yeah, and something I reflect on, Mike, is it's such big business. Whether it's conservative talk radio on one end, or on the other end, you can go to late night comedy, right? You can, at times, the late night comedians are, this person's crazy and wacko and goofy and terrible. And then on the conservative talk radio, it's this person's crazy, wacko, and terrible. And billions of dollars are being invested and reinforcing those narratives. And I'm going to keep going back to this book because he has an interesting perspective. Tim Urban does. He calls it the real politicians of Washington, D.C. It's like we have this reality TV show and we have our cast of characters, and that's what's, presented to the American public. And he starts naming senators who are really trying to do good work that you've never heard of. So how do we disrupt that system that is a multi-billion-dollar industry, keeping us agitated, keeping us scared, keeping us worried, keeping us a little bit on edge is big business. And it's almost like the Dorito for the mind. They've figured out the recipe, right? That's going to make me click,
We've gotten way too big as far as I'm concerned. Smaller, I think, could be wrong. I think smaller is better. And find ways to work locally in our communities. We shouldn't have such enormous businesses. I mean, there used to be monopoly antitrust laws that have begun to be, eroded over and over again. And the companies get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they want one thing, and that is the shareholder profit. Mm-hmm. This is going to sound, I don't care if it's what it sounds like. This may sound idealistic. I don't care. I think that our problems are often philosophical in nature. They have to do with our beliefs about what it means to be a person, or that we think that what it means to be a person is a self-interested, me-focused individual, whether that person is a CEO, the head of a family, or what have you. We're in trouble. I think that what we need is a new conception, not an individualistic one, but a relational conception of what a person is. And what a corporation is, so that a corporation ought not to be simply interested in profit. A corporation should have at least three motives. A corporation should have, yes, they need to be interested in profit. They need to be interested in prudence. They also need to be interested in virtue. And they also need to be interested in care. Those three things. Profit is okay. But what type of a company am I? What do I stand for? What do I care about? What am I doing that's good for my workers, for my customers, for my community? And care. How do I act in ways that care? There are companies that do this. Look at Market Basket in Massachusetts, a remarkable store that runs multiple stores, a chain of stores as a family. At Market Basket, they have people working during the day, not at night, so they can answer people's questions. Everybody who works there is trained in every other aspect of their business so that they can rise. If there's a problem, people try to solve it internally. That's a way of defining who I am as a corporation that is moral and good, not simply profitable. Get a politician of note to begin to actually have the courage to say, it is important that we work toward being virtuous and good, not simply selfish. We need a relational understanding of what it means to be a person. Little by little by little by little, people will begin to reflect and hopefully change what their motives and values are for living.
Back to your comment earlier about emotions, start to feel what that difference is like, right?
That's a wonderful point. Yeah.
I mean, imagine those 6 individuals who walked out of that room after, was it 18 months, you said? I mean, I imagine they walked out different people, in part because of how they felt to get through some of those difficult conversations.
I would like to think so. Very early on, I remember one individual who was talking. It was very early on, and he was just so excited about what was happening amongst us. And the thing he was excited about was that people from different persuasions were talking and not killing each other. That was it. They were talking civilly. For me, I want people to solve problems. I want people to go beyond that. I think we did that. But people like nothing better than to contribute to each other's well-being. feel good when we affect another people's life. We are more enhanced when we contribute to the well-being of others. That's a feeling. That's a deep feeling. You have that feeling, you act on it. And I am not at all convinced that companies can't cultivate that sort of a mindset, that sort of a belief system. We got a better society because we got better people, because we have better values.
Mm. And I think there's some deep human needs, to your point earlier, of connection with others, of feeling a sense of purpose. Why am I here? What am I trying to accomplish? What problem am I working that I'm passionate about that really keeps me engaged and really, really fueled? And I think of digitization, online connectivity. I think of what some of the corporate establishment, many elements of the context are not going anywhere.
Mm.
So the opportunity of how do we facilitate that shift? What experiments will help scale some of that? And I know that you had said that it starts local and we start with those local conversations. And I'm just really, really interested in that question. You have any other ideas how we scale that, how we train folks to identify what that is they value, to help give them the skills to engage in the difficult conversations, create spaces for those conversations to occur, get some self-efficacy and some confidence around the fact that we can do this work and I felt it and I know that this can happen. And then again, to your point, we start working on some of the real work, right?
Well, so what if we had some national people, people who have means, who have resources? You said, that I had said earlier that start local, or you're right. It needs to not just be local. It needs to be both local. It needs to be global as well. We can take examples of conversations and ways of communicating that occur on the local level, and we have the technology and the means to broadcast them on the global level. Here's an example of how this is done.
And you know what's beautiful about that idea is it would align with the reality TV culture, right? I mean, we have the news outlets playing, the real politicians of Washington, D.C. That's the reality television narrative that they're communicating, regardless of whatever side you're on. At times, you've got your heroes and you have your villains. But what if we actually created opportunities for people to peek into that? Because that's real. That is real. And that's I mean, again, if I think of what if a documentary or a series on any one of the streaming services was produced based out of the conversations you facilitated?
Mm.
A, it's very interesting television, and B, it was educational.
I think that people resonate and gravitate to things that are better and more sophisticated than what they already know. If you build a better mousetrap, what we have right now is people kind of engage in a lot of banal, lowest common denominator types of activities. Films that are based on vengeance. We get into Facebook and we attack each other. We watch reality TV to see people. Well, you know what? If you come up with a better show, if you come up with something that people are longing for, if you show them that they can be connected to each other and have them participate in that, they'll watch that. They'll engage in that. We got to build it, though. I'm convinced that we can use technology for good.
I think of that television show Sunday Morning. Like, that was they play the trumpets at the beginning and it's on CBS and it's like all just a series of good positive stories or check-ins with people that you're familiar with, but it's life affirming, it's life giving. It's not I don't walk away from it feeling drained and tired like I do from
Yep.
other things.
Yep. I'm reminded of many years ago when I was looking for cooperative ways of teaching people cooperative rather than competitive ways of being together. There were people who talked about games. So we have competitive games all over it. Everything's competitive, competitive, competitive. And there's good things about competition. We don't actually bring them out, but there's good things about competition. And then people said, hey, you can come up with a cooperative game that is just as exciting as a competitive game. I said, no, you can't. Well, you can. Simple stuff like, okay, we all have to create this farm together. We have to figure out how to plant these seeds and put them in the ground before the sun goes down. So, if you will, we are all working together, if you will, competing against the sun. It's a lame example, I grant you. It could be done.
Yes. Well, I think it can be done in business as well, right? You have a B corporation that is trying to not only, to your point, make money, but leave the world a better place. You're going for that both and in the mission of the organization. And individuals within the organization are cooperating to create something that's going to make a difference and going to leave the world a better place. And so for sure, I think it's a wonderful concept. Okay, if we go back to kind of one of the original places we started, which is a question that you are interested in, which is really, how do individuals become whole persons? What I'm gathering out of our conversation so far, and you can let me know, Mike, if I've caught it or if I'm missing some big piece, but you have an individual who's clear and present with what their ethics are and what it is that they value. You have an individual who is in community, and that means that they are in community engaging with others, and oftentimes engaging with others not like themselves, and engaging in healthy ways with others, maybe not like themselves. And then you have an individual who has a purpose that they are, or a problem, if we want to frame it that way. But there's something that gets them up in the morning that they're passionate about, and that it's a fuel to guide their efforts. Am I missing anything?
Yeah, you got it, man. I think it's great. If I had to add anything to that, thank you. It feels wonderful to be heard. I've come to believe almost, this might be a bit hyperbolic, but I've come to believe that there's only one question. What is good?
Hmm.
What is the good? What is good for me? What is good for the world? What is virtuous? What will lead to well-being? And we don't think that way. We assume that everybody has their own interests. We assume that everybody is self-interested, has their own goals, and we think that what is good is that which brings pleasure. And to be sure, we want pleasure, we want fun. But there are higher pleasures, there are greater pleasures, there are deeper pleasures, and those are pleasures that give our life meaning. They're the pleasures that come from purpose and a higher order being. What's going on right now between us? You are engaged in this podcast. I'm sure that there is something that you're going to get from this in yourself, in your goals, your personal goals.
Sure.
We look at it, we see a person who is engaged in an act of goodness, of trying to interview people, of trying to make the world a better place. And that's what's fueling you, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what gives this meaning for you and sustains you over 3 years plus or whatever it is. And why can't that be our model right from the start with our children, rather than destroying them with the way in which we engage in education? And what if we taught our children in ways that help them to identify the good in their world and to create the potential within themselves to want to contribute to the world in that way?
Yep.
We do that, you got a different world. You got a different world. Maybe idealistic, but guess what? I don't care.
Well, Mike, what's caught your attention in recent times that you would want listeners to have an awareness of, something that you've enjoyed?
Well, strangely enough, someone who doesn't read a lot of fiction, I just got done reading, listening to, and not reading Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky's wonderful, crazy, long, wonderful epic. So there's that. You can't go wrong with the classics. And right now I'm reading All Things Shining, which is a discussion of meaning has been created in different ways at different epochs in human existence, and drawing on the classics and that sort of thing, with an emphasis on how can we get a spiritual and moral sense back into our culture in these secular times. And again, I say that as a non-believer. I'm a non-believer who believes we need more spirituality.
Mm. Mm. Sir, I really, really enjoyed the conversation. I'd love to have you back and continue the dialogue because I think some of these big questions are at the core of some of the struggles that we have, and not only as individuals, but as families. I just really appreciate your time and I appreciate your work. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
I am reminded of a conversation that I had. It might have been episode 2 or 3 of this whole series called It Has to Be with Others. And that was with John Wergen. And we were talking about his book, Deep Learning in a Disorienting World. Just an incredible read. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But this whole notion of engaging in community. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you listened to my discussion with Anne-Marie de Jong from Better Future. And there's other episodes that really nicely connect to this as well. Is it with others? Are we in community? Are we building relationships? Are we connecting? And whether that's when we are learning or we are working to make the world a better place. I have a conversation with Meg Wheatley. Similar, local level, strong relationships in community. So becoming a whole person, I think there's some clues in that conversation with Mike, and I just can't thank you enough, sir, for your time, for the work that you do. Check out the links in the show notes, everyone. Take care. Thank you so much, and be well. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.